Go.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to this DD Hangout show this evening. My name is Gary Middleton, and I'm a business development manager with the group networking team at Dimension Data. And today I'm joined by Stephen Mills, and we're going to be talking about programmable infrastructure, but more specifically the security implications that are introduced through the use of programmable infrastructure, and how that will impact some of our clients' environments and operations. But first, let me introduce my co-host. Based in Australia is Stephen Mills. Stephen is a product manager for our security consulting offerings within the group security BU at Dimension Data. Welcome, Stephen.
Thanks, Gary. Great to be here. Very warm welcome from Australia.
Really warm welcome. Good. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention to everybody in the call that if you have any comments or questions, please put them into the Google Plus event page or tweet them to hashtag DD Hangouts, and we'll certainly respond as soon as possible. And if you're catching the recording of the event, please send your feedback using any of the mechanisms, any of the channels that Dimension Data run, and we'll certainly get back to you. So moving on to the topic of the day, we're going to be talking about security and programmable infrastructures. But before we get into the security aspects, I thought I'd just give a quick introduction to programmable infrastructures as we see them, and what we're seeing within our global business on how clients are adopting some of the programmable infrastructures. So the first thing we see is a general move, not just across networking, but across all IT infrastructures, a move from hardware to software, and network function and IT function in general moving from hardware to software. And I think the best analogy we can, if we think of our daily lives and how infrastructure impacts us on a personal level, our homes as an example. We've seen introduction of home automation systems where you have wiring systems in the home that can be reconfigured simply by updating of the software. So one light switch in a particular room can switch on a different light in the home. The wiring itself and the switches and the infrastructure doesn't change within the house. It's simply the way in which the software controls that allows it to be changed. And also in cars and the motor industry, we're seeing much more sophisticated software in cars that when you download a new image for your car, the power curve is different. The way that the car handles is very different. Again, nothing changes in the infrastructure, but it's the software that operates the car that has a huge impact on the way that the car operates and the way that the user experiences that car. Now, if we take those two analogies across to IT infrastructures, we're seeing the same thing starting to be applied to IT, where the function is now controlled in the software, and it's less reliant on the hardware itself, on how things are configured, etc. So that delivers a couple of significant benefits to our clients. One is that the infrastructure is infinitely more flexible. You can do much more with that same infrastructure. You can reconfigure it very quickly to do different things, and that results in significant cost savings through operational cost savings. If you can automate a whole lot of things through software, then that will reduce your cost significantly. And interestingly, we're starting to see much more widespread adoption, specifically of software-defined networking. For Dimension Data, this was a relatively small business, I would say 12 months ago, but it's becoming much more important for our networking practice. And we've seen 3,000% growth in our clients buying and investing in software-defined infrastructure from us. So we're certainly starting to see adoption within the client base. And we think that the whole move towards software-defined everything, software-defined data centers, software-defined networking, is a precursor to a whole new way to operate clients' infrastructure through, a DevOps style of operations. So we certainly see the two working hand in hand. A different style of operating the infrastructure and the way in which the actual infrastructure is built using software. So anyway, big trend. Huge adoption. We're going to see it as being a major, important element of the Dimension Data business going forward. But if we start looking at what does that actually mean for our security environments, and Stephen, I'd like to bring you into the discussion here. When we talk about security, I just want, perhaps we can remind the audience about what are some of the basic things, across all infrastructures that you think clients should be looking at from a security perspective.
Yeah, so I think when we preface information security, there's one thing that always comes out is the fact that we talk about this CIA triad, which is essentially confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And if we term security in these key areas and we link it to SDN, when we talk about confidentiality, we're really talking about keeping something secret, keeping it's similar to privacy, right? And from SDN world, we're looking to control and keep the flow of information secret from any other source that might be actually listening and eavesdropping on that information. So that's kind of what we preface SDN around confidentiality. Integrity is really around where we're trying to maintain consistency and accuracy of the information that's traversed in the network. So as it's sent over the wire, we want to make sure that the information is not tampered with in any way. The third one is availability. And obviously in the network, it's also very, very important. If you've got something that's a service, you want to really make sure it's up and maintained. Once a service goes down, it sort of starts to lose its ability to serve up an application or to keep someone online, basically. That's really the tenets of security. And when we're talking about trying to protect, when we're talking to what we're actually trying really to protect here from an SDN perspective, there's a couple of areas within the SDN and I guess generally network infrastructure that we're looking at. If I break these up into a number of them, the first one would be essentially the network itself. And as I said before, without the network, communications would fail. So being able to ensure that we're protecting that is very, very key. Without the network, we can't really do anything. We can't connect applications. We can't traverse data. We can't share information. It's really the vehicle that drives a lot of getting online. Obviously, people use this network, and SDN is no different. So endpoints such as laptops, desktops, and servers is very key. We need to be able to control and secure those assets from all sorts of different types of attacks. The second last one is data itself. So obviously SDN is used to share information, and data is really something that is important to businesses. It's essentially the intellectual property that organizations are trying to protect. And if you look at what hackers are going for these days, it's actually information. It's not so much attacking the asset itself as a means to an end. It's actually the data that's on that network and within applications. And that leads me to one of the last points is around applications. This is essentially a gatekeeper to the data that hackers might actually use. So being able to protect those applications, whether it be driving a website or a database or something like that, these are the sort of the assets that we'll be looking to protect. And obviously, there's the infrastructure itself, so the SDN infrastructure itself. And I don't think we'll really have time to go into the nuts and bolts of the infrastructure, but suffice to say, there's a couple of different layers that make up the SDN environment. You can start off looking at the application layer, which is where the business apps interact and consume the SDN service. Then you've got the control layer, which is where you're essentially controlling the functionality of that supervises the network forwarding behavior that's being used within the SDN environment, similar to what we see in networks today. And then you've got the infrastructure or data plane layer, which is consisting of the network elements that provide the actual packet switching and forwarding. In terms of who we're trying to protect against, it's really malicious users. And I think if we just simply put this in two flavors, we're looking at the insider threat, which is where people have access to typically a malicious person, has access to the network itself internally, and that obviously presents itself with a bunch of risks. Then you've got, again, an external threat, which is really where you're talking about the big bad internet. And obviously, from an SDN perspective, it's the same principles apply. We want to make sure that we're protecting the network from using segregation controls and other types of controls, using a defense in depth sort of mechanism to make sure that we're protecting the SDN or the network. And typically how we do that is by making sure we have boundaries of trust and securing of the applications and endpoints.
Excellent. Yeah, Stephen, thank you. I really like the way you answered that question, because in technology, trends come and go. New technologies are here all the time. But ultimately, what we're saying here is that the initial principles of security that we've been speaking about for a decade or more still apply.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So not necessarily saying that all of the knowledge we have needs to go out the window and let's start from scratch. It's more an evolution of the technology will evolve, but the principles absolutely remain the same. And I think that's a key thing to understand here.
Absolutely.
Excellent. So if we just move on a little bit, going back to programmable infrastructures and just focusing a little bit on the programmable networking, what we're really starting to see is a couple of camps emerge, if you like. One is the single vendor ecosystems of where a particular company would stand up with an SDN offering of some kind, and they would make a claim that they can offer all of the ecosystem elements to make up a software-defined network solution. We're starting to see more rounded vendor ecosystems emerge, where that you might have a lead vendor in a particular area, but then they have an ecosystem of complementary partners that can participate to deliver an overall programmable infrastructure. And then, of course, there's the whole open source approach. And I think open source is an interesting one because it garners a huge amount of press and a lot of discussion and a lot of interest from clients because of the perceived cost savings. And there's no doubt that there is an element of cost savings to be seen there. But I think from what we're seeing in our client base, and we're primarily talking enterprise clients here, that there's a preference for vendor ecosystems. I think that was the one that we certainly in our business are seeing the biggest adoption in. And that's, in our view, because there's a sense of there's less risk if you're adopting a technology from a partner that is a well-established partner that has a strong backing, and there's a strong understanding that the technology will deliver what it says it's going to deliver on the box. So if we look at the open source, on the other hand, all the code is there, and it is certainly possible to cobble together an open source solution of some kind, but you need an army of developers that really understand what they're doing to put it together. And in many ways, there is as much lock-in to open source as with any of the other vendor technologies. So I think our clients certainly need to walk into an open source with with that mindset that they know what they're getting into. I think we're certainly going to see more open source being adopted in our client base over time as people get more comfortable with it. But right now, as we take a checkpoint in February 2015, the vendor ecosystems are the ones that seem to be gathering the most traction. So Stephen, back to you. You were talking a little bit about the attack vectors of a programmable infrastructure. And I know you've done a little bit of looking into this, and so have I, and we can bounce it to and fro. But what are your views on what are some of the new attack vectors that are introduced through software-defined networking?
Yeah, so I think, the attack vectors themselves aren't exactly new in the sense that they're new concepts. I think we're dealing with similar kinds of things that we're dealing with in the network world. But just attacking different parts of the network. So, if I just sort of list down some of the types of vectors that, we as sort of network and security professionals need to consider, This would form part of, I guess, the design planning and architecture that you'd want to make sure protects against these kinds of things. And when you get to the design phase of building an SDN or a network, you need to take these things into consideration as part of your risk assessment. But typically, based on some work and research I've done on the subject and attending some conferences, we can see that there is some vectors that hackers are using today. And obviously, the SDN journey is still quite new. It's still evolving, but essentially, based on, as you said before, the open source sort of versus commercial software, when packages are kind of bundled together from off-the-shelf products, there is potential of some areas that may expose the SDN infrastructure to compromise. And some areas that we've seen especially is around authentication. How you actually connect to the web services that control the SDN controllers and infrastructure. Some of them have got default passwords or even no passwords to control those assets. So if you're able to merely talk to the controller using a web service, then that is something that might actually get you into a lot of trouble. Another type of approach is by using that kind of attack vector. You could actually tell the system what to do, or the SDN what to do, the controller what to do, and this could lead you into spoofing traffic to be able to control the flow of information and perhaps even create new flows on the SDN. So essentially, you could actually re-divert or change the flow of traffic to sidestep a security measure or boundary. So maybe routing traffic through something that even the hacker can see, so he can then perform what we call a man-in-the-middle attack. And the man-in-the-middle attack would then be used to inspect and eavesdrop on that information and perhaps pick up passwords, credit card information, and so on. Other types of attack on infrastructure in general is denial of service attacks. This is really where you're sending a whole bunch of traffic to one particular asset to make it maybe lose in network packets or be able to not be available to serve up and to be actually on the network. So that's obviously a concern. There's attacking the actual operating system itself on a lot of controllers, or some of the controllers that we've seen. They're based on open source or even commercial software, where you're actually attacking the operating system itself. And if the operating system is not secured in any way, or it's a default install, with lots of different packages installed, then it could be susceptible to being exposed to vulnerabilities that affect everyday operating systems. Also, the last point is around the APIs themselves. And as I said before, no authentication is obviously something that would give us access to change what the actual device is doing. So really want to make sure that those APIs are tightened down.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. Just adding a little bit to what you said there. If you consider in an SDN model, if you like, you have the hardware layer, and depending on which camp you're talking about, either the device is an absolutely dumb networking device that simply moves packets around, or there's a level of intelligence in there. In our business, and what we're seeing is that the clients are deploying networking technologies that have intelligence still built into that infrastructure and are simply looking at software to control it. So the hardware still remains a critical element of, to be attacked, or potential to be attacked. So we need to look at, patching all the network devices, making sure all the infrastructure's, up to the right patch level, that it's not, it's not vulnerable to a particular attack at all. So that all of those mechanisms that we are so familiar with security still apply in software-defined networking. Then if you look at the middle layer of the SDN stack, you have the software-defined networking controller, which is the the piece that's doing the some of the intelligence from the hardware is moving into software, and that then becomes a critical element of the infrastructure. So you need to have defense in depth around that, because if that's compromised using whatever any one of the attacks you mentioned earlier, then that could be used to then infiltrate the network and do all kinds of horrible things that you described so well there. So that becomes an unbelievably critical piece of infrastructure, and the whole confidentiality, availability, the whole CIA thing absolutely needs to be retained for the controllers. And then if you look at the third layer of the SDN stack, that's either the orchestration or the application layer, and that always has been a critical infrastructure, and that even more so if there is a third-party app, specific network app that's been written to work with the network to do a specific function of whatever kind, so that software itself needs to be secure, and the client needs to then start worrying about things like lifecycle management of their own network apps, if you like, or make sure that the people, that the companies that they're engaging to write those apps are following the correct life cycles and are doing that code has been written in a secure way. And again, what you so eloquently called out, I thought was the APIs, because again, with these three layers and the pie, if you like, they talk to each other through APIs. And if you're able to either DDoS those API calls, then the network's going to crash, or if you're able to get involved or somehow make those API calls less secure, then of course the whole infrastructure goes south. So I think you called it out incredibly well there. But if you look at the SDN stack, there's a whole bunch of things that could potentially go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to ask you specifically. I know you went to the Black Hat conference recently, and some interesting stuff you saw there.
Yeah, I think with Black Hat, I went there last year in 2014, and with SDN, it's obviously becoming it's garnering a lot of interest. Obviously not just within the network world, but also within the security world. So obviously, we go hand in hand in terms of seeing what's out in the market from a security perspective, and being able to make sure that we can actually protect against something that is going to be put in that place. So obviously SDN is new. We know it's coming. If I looked at the keynote speakers from Black Hat, there was, I think I pointed out 3 or 4 different different sessions on it. And I attended one of them, was around demoing some tools that were used to discover an SDN infrastructure and also then attack it. And if I going into that conference, it was one of the larger of the rooms, which had lots and lots of people. We could barely get a seat into the place, which tells me that the security folks are very much are generally interested in SDN, because I know that it is a future technology that will influence the security of not only the network itself, but also the assets and the applications and the data. So obviously it's going to play a major role. And in terms of the demonstration, we had a guy that had put together a tool chain, what we call it, so basically a complement of software components that were used to essentially compromise an SDN. And the SDN distribution they were looking at was a piece of software that was put together. I think it was open source, I believe so. But suffice to say, there's obviously some things that we need to bear in mind when we put these things together. And the security committee, both from the Black Hat perspective, if we talk about malicious users, or the White Hat perspective, they're obviously making sure that we have the tools in place to test it, but also a way for us to make sure that this stuff is secure. I guess the final point on that is that hackers will always find innovative ways to exploit weakness. And given that SDN is a new technology, we're probably still learning, and the industry is still learning. to properly deploy it in a secure manner. So once we get through that kind of hurdle, before we get to that kind of hurdle, we need to make sure that we've positioned it right, we've designed it right to be secure from any type of malicious person.
Yeah, interesting. And so if we move on from what you're talking around Black Hat there to the broader security industry, I mean, what are your views on how the security industry is responding to this whole trend of not just SDN, but programmable infrastructure as a whole, and the software-defined data center, and all of these things? How do you think the security industry is responding to that?
Well, I think obviously SDN has raised a profile, infrastructure has raised a profile. I mean, we see it as an opportunity within security, because if you look at what software-defined something is doing, it's really changing the way that we work. It's turning everything on its head. Yeah, and in the sense that if you're looking to build out a complete software-defined infrastructure, you kind of have to think more carefully about security, because you're embedding security at every process within the technology, from orchestration right to installation and processing of whatever it is. So from a security perspective, we absolutely we want to be part of the conversation. We see focus in the data center is a key area for us in security. So it's something that we absolutely want to play a role in. From a security perspective, there's so many opportunities to embed security into the infrastructure. I'll give you some examples where the actual SDN itself will allow us to if we find, for instance, some traffic that appears to be, at some point to be look to be an indicator of compromise, we might be able to see that this could be an issue. So through software, we can actually redirect that traffic to maybe a security zone to get inspected, and through that security zone, we could do some testing of that traffic. At the same time, we could be informing our secure operations center that this is actually taking place, and being able to do that, we can then follow a whole process for incident response in a very, very short period of time. So we're going from an infrastructure that has to have all these manual processes involved and all these different working parts to have a streamlined process driven all by software. So from a vendor perspective, we're seeing that everyone's starting to get on board with this, and they're starting to put products together to make this happen from a security perspective. So we're very excited.
Brilliant, thank you. Thanks a lot for that, Stephen. So just talking through a couple of things that we're seeing our clients doing specifically to improve their security posture using SDN type technologies. I mean, the one that bubbles to the surface again and again is this notion of a micro segmentation, where it's the virtual machine, the VM, has arguably become, or not arguably, it has become, the building block for modern computing and certainly cloud computing. And as those VMs are migrating around the infrastructure and are can scale up and scale down, it's been one of the big challenges in the security industry is how the heck do we apply security policy on a per VM basis or a per application basis that might have multiple VMs. So through the advent of SDN, we're now in a position where we can actually do that quite effectively. We can apply a firewall policy, intrusion prevention policy directly on a per VM basis, and those security policies can then also move and migrate along with the VMs. And of course, then that you have a VM and the policy of just migrating around the infrastructure, that's clearly going to be the best way to provide a level of security on a per VM basis. And that we're certainly starting to see our clients adopting and investing in, which is interesting. I think the second one we're starting to see is the whole notion of just building upon that first one a little bit extra is web application firewalling, which is just that extra level of I suppose defense in depth on a per VM basis, and being able to apply that in an elastic fashion, scale up, scale down, dependent upon how the infrastructure is operating, and that too we're starting to see clients investing in a significant way. And then lastly, what we're seeing is, it's always been a challenge for us in the industry to make sure we're extracting appropriate information from the network and analyze it. It's one thing to prevent an attack, but it's also incredibly important to retain evidence and to keep track of log files so that we can understand what happened post the event to prevent it from happening again. And in that way, we're starting to see clients utilizing inexpensive software-defined network switches as a tap aggregation device, put it into the network, and then using scripting and software, you extract appropriate network management data and feed it off to a security incident management farm or a reporting farm of some kind, and in that way you're able to significantly reduce your cost of tap aggregation, and you're able to very tightly control what type of management traffic gets to the tools that you have in your environment, and that aids your security posture significantly. And we really are starting to see clients invest in that stuff too. So in many ways, if we look at the examples that our clients are investing in today, plus the things that we think that they're able to do in the future, that Stephen spoke about earlier, and I'm starting to see terms like tar pits and safety nets and all of these things being introduced through the notion of having a piece of software that can swiftly and intelligently interrogate what's happening and then configure the network in a certain way to respond. So I think this is, as Stephen says, very exciting for the networking and the security industry as we see things evolving over time. So that's fantastic. Just a few on the dimension data approach here. We have a significant networking practice and an unbelievable security practice. I think bringing the two disciplines together is something that we can be very strong in across the 60 countries that we operate in around the world. But if you look at in both of those areas, we have the ability to provide consulting around programmable infrastructures, around software-defined networking, around security infrastructure, but also in addition around governance, risk, compliance. So we have a very strong ability to consult with clients. We also have the deep ability to implement technology, and it's one thing to find the problem, but then to remediate it clearly is the next important thing. And again, to have feet on the street in 60 countries that can, with a degree of depth and understanding, deploy a fundamentally robust networking infrastructure and a security infrastructure to support it, to ultimately achieve the client's business objectives, is something that we're incredibly good at, whilst keeping the client's risk very low, and keeping an eye on the client's business is something that we're very strong in. Stephen, do you have any other points in our security practice do you think are worth talking about? Because I know we have a very, very strong one.
Yeah, I think I think you've said it really well. We have we're in 60 countries. We have upwards of, I think, 500 people in our business, 300, 400 people in our business. If we look at SDN and where we think we're going to play, obviously, we typically engage networking, and we go hand in hand in terms of understanding the proposition, understanding the technology, so we can then go through the process of making sure it's secure. So if we look at this, from a security perspective, we want to make sure that our clients engage not only to install the SDN itself, but make sure it's secure. And if we look at it from a security BU perspective, we're looking at programs to make that happen. And some things that we'd recommend our customers to do, certainly hand in hand with an integrator, would be to make sure that you review your software-defined data center strategy to really understand what you want to achieve out of the SDN environment, and then with that in mind, then performing an SDN readiness assessment, and obviously that would be a part of what the networking team can do in consultation with security. And from a security perspective, we would want to make sure through a consultative approach that we're reviewing the existing security capability within the organization. It could be people, process, technology, to make sure that, you know, if we install this, or if this infrastructure is installed, who's going to monitor it, who's going to manage it, who's going to secure it, and so on. And then finally, we'd want to do some sort of architecture review and to come up with an architecture strategy that would be in line with their business requirements, and obviously, you know, in line with what they want to do with SDN. So armed with those kinds of processes and what Dimension Data can do, that's how we see us working with networking, the networking BU, from a security perspective.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Stephen. We're pretty much at the bottom of the hour. Stephen, any final thoughts from you?
Really just say that, you know, we truly see that software-defined networking isn't something that is going to go away. I think it truly is a security enabler, in the fact that you can insert security into different parts of the network and ensure that it becomes part of the process. So from a security perspective, it's extremely exciting for us, and I see it as something that will certainly elevate or lower the risk that we so want to achieve through the operation of networks. So thanks very much, Gary.
Good. And then just some final words from me. I have to agree with what Stephen was saying there, that there's no doubt that, you know, programmable infrastructures and SDN is beyond a trend. You know, it's here. It's here to stay. And we're seeing clients deploying software-defined networks today at scale already. So, you know, to talk about being a futures technology is absolutely incorrect. It's a today's technology that we're starting to see being deployed, you know, significantly, and not just in one or two countries, but in many countries and all territories that we operate in. You know, we're starting to see clients invest in this technology. So there's no doubt there's going to be a lot more in this space, and I think you know, it does definitely enable us to do things differently in the network, and allow us to, you know, build infrastructures that meet our clients' objectives that much more. So that's it. I'm just going to ask whether there are any questions that came up on the chat thing that we may need to respond to. No questions. So I'm going to call it there. Thank you so much for joining, and please, if you're catching the recording of this, or you have any future comments or feedback, please send it by any of the Dimension Data channels, the social media channels, or email. We'd really appreciate any feedback. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.